Hello everyone, my name is Protesilaos, also known as Prot. In this video I want to talk to you about the topic of learning Emacs and Emacs Lisp. I am prompted to do this video because I keep getting emails about it. This is one of the most persistent questions. How do you learn Emacs? How do you go from being a rookie, a newcomer, to developing expertise in Emacs Lisp and generally to using Emacs effectively? How do you do that? In my .emacs, which I have on the buffer here to my left, I include a section with such frequently asked questions. And of course, how do you learn Emacs is one of them. And I tackle this question by explaining how to get started, or at least by providing some hints for those who want to take it from there. However, I think that in addition to having this in written form, it is good to have a video as well because of the visual aspect of it. You may need to understand how these interfaces look in order to appreciate them even more. And then, of course, the video is easier to just describe things without having to go into the technicalities of text and without having to check my .emacs, which is an otherwise massive document. It is huge. So maybe you don't want to do that. You just want to watch this video to get started, or at least to have some idea about what to keep in mind. So let's proceed to today's presentation. And what I have here is just an org mode file, and I have prepared a presentation for you. It is divided in several sections, so let's take it one step at a time. I will start by recommending something that is not about the help system of Emacs or the manuals or anything. And this is to install a package, or generally to use a package that improves the interface of the completion framework that you are using. And by completion, I mean basically anything that involves the mini buffer and gives you the option to choose among multiple items. These are known as candidates. So you can choose by selecting, for example, let's show you here. You can choose by selecting like this, or you can narrow the list. So this means to type in some characters and then select what you want. So this is completion. This is what we mean by completion. And the best thing you can do to upgrade your Emacs setup, is to have a package that handles the visualization of completions nicely. Of course, if it has other extras, even better, but you just want to have the interactivity made available to you right away. There are several options, several good options, though for our purposes, I recommend you get started with a nimble tool called Vertigo by Daniel Mendler. Daniel Mendler is an expert when it comes to writing packages. When you see Daniel Mendler, you know that it is a good package. That's basically a seal of quality. So Vertigo is excellent in its own right. It is very good for newcomers because it just works very well out of the box. It also is highly configurable, so the more you gain experience with Emacs, the more you can keep on using Vertigo. It will always be with you. Experts use Vertigo as well. In short, it is one of the best Emacs packages on offer. So before installing a package, you have to use the command package refresh contents. So mx package refresh contents, and you hit the return key, which will refresh the index of the archive so that when you try to install the package, it will find the latest version. and then you just type Emacs package install and supply Vertigo as the name of the package that you want to install. It will install it, and then you either enable it with Emacs Vertigo mode, or you just add this little snippet to your Emacs configuration file. So that's all, and now you have Vertigo enabled, and Vertigo will visualize candidates like what I am showing here. I am not using Vertigo myself, but it doesn't matter, it's the same principle. Vertigo will show you candidates like these, and then you can move up and down or type to narrow the list, that kind of thing. It is very helpful to get started, because whenever you invoke some command, you will know what kind of options you have, what kind of actions you are about to perform. So that's the basic first step. Now that we have this in place, we want to focus on the help system that is at the core of the Emacs experience. As I claim over here, the help system is your best friend. It is the single most important piece of functionality that you will always be using, no matter your level of expertise in Emacs. If you are a beginner, you need the help system. If you are an experienced user, you need the help system. If you are writing packages, you need the help system. If you are an Emacs maintainer, you need the help system. It doesn't matter, you will always be using it, and that is one of its great strengths. So it is always good to learn by watching videos such as this one or other videos that I do, as well as those of people like David Wilson, the System Crafters channel, Andrew Tropin, Mike Zamansky, Raul Komninos, also known as Emacs Elements, and others. However, the best option will always be, at least the best default option, what your baseline should be. It should always be to rely on your own means and to leverage what Emacs has to offer. So to make use of Emacs's own documentation system, which is what is known as self-documenting. I won't elaborate on this now, I have covered it in other videos, but suffice to say that it will cover your needs. It knows what you are asking of it, and it will provide good answers. So this means, in very practical terms, that you have to learn how to use commands that extend the Control-H prefix key. So you type Control-H and then another key or key sequence, and you get help about that specific thing. I have a list over here, we will demonstrate it as well, but let's read it first and then we can see how they work. Control-HF is help for functions. Control-HV for variables. You notice the mnemonic value as well. Control-HO for functions or variables. Control-HK for the given key binding. So it will prompt you for a key, you will type something, and it will tell you if it is bound to some command, and if so, which command that is. Control-HW, it will ask you where the given command is bound to. And you give it the name of a command, and it will tell you if it is bound to any key from the specific interface you are in. Control-HM is a great one, which is for the modes that are pertinent to what you are doing. So this means the major mode you are in and the minor modes that are active. So let's see this in practice. Let's start with Control-HF. So let's say I want to learn something about that starts with modus. I don't know anything about this and I want to learn. So I can see that there are lots of options over here. For example, there is this over here, modus themes toggle, and let's hit the return key. It produces a help buffer, you see it over here, and it says modus themes toggle is an interactive command, blah, blah, blah. It is bound to this key binding over here, and it is giving me the doc string, the documentation string of this command. In other words, it describes what it does. So it toggles between those things, blah, blah, blah. No need to belabor the point. Let's see now for variables. Control HV, same principle again. Control HV and you get variables over here. So let's continue typing. For example, this one, sorry. I wrote wrong. Let's use this one over here. So we see again, it describes the variable and it explains everything it does. Notice now that in help buffers, maybe let's switch the orientation like this. Notice that in help buffers there are links. Okay, so if you are paying attention, you will see that this is a link to the file. So if I hit the return key while over the link, or if I use the mouse and type mouse 1, so right click, left click rather. So if you follow this link anyway, it will take you to the source code of the given variable or function or whatever. So this is good to know. It will come in handy in many situations. And it may also provide links to customize, so you can customize this variable, or to other variables or functions and explain what those are. So just something for you to keep in mind, that those are all interconnected, so you can always go from one function or variable to the source code, from the source code back to a help buffer, and so on. Control HO is exactly the same principle, and you should use this when you are not sure whether what you are searching for is a function or a variable. So Control HO and modus, and this gives me functions and variables. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you know that what you are searching for is a variable, you do Control HV because it narrows the candidates. Control HF for functions and so on. Control HK now, it will prompt you for a key binding. So let's type in, for example, Control and the letter N. Control and N runs the command next line, and this command is found in the global map, and then it explains the documentation about next line. So this is very helpful as well. We will see some practical examples of this later in the video. Control HW, it will tell you where a specific command is bound to. So let's say, for example, remember I used modus before. So for example here, modus themes toggle, it is telling me modus themes toggle is on F5. So that's good to know. Notice that it uses completion. So for example, I can check other commands as well. For example, modus themes list colors. Modus themes list colors is not on any key. So that's good to know as well, that it is not bound anywhere. It is not on any key in the given context. This is important to bear in mind, because if I do, for example, Control HW and search for a command that exists only in another major mode, for example, dired, let's say copy, let's say dired do copy, or dred if you want. Dred do copy is not on any key, but if you are in a dred buffer, then this command will tell you which key invokes this command, because there are some keys, some commands rather, that are bound to key maps that are mode specific. For example, here I am in org mode, and if I do Control HK, Control C, Control T, it is telling me that this key sequence invokes the command org to do, and this command is found in the org mode map. So this is important because in another major mode, Control C, Control T may be doing something entirely different. So that's why Control HW will tell you what applies to the context you are in, to the specific major mode you are in. So that is important to bear in mind, because not all commands are in the global map. And Control HM, let's use Control HM. This again produces a help buffer for the major mode you are in and for all the enabled minor modes. These are the enabled minor modes over here, and then below you get the major mode. It describes the major mode, what it is, and then further below, this is the best part in my opinion, you get the key bindings that are active in this major mode's key map and the commands they call. For example, meta and ret, and the return key that is, invokes the command org meta return, org attach, I see over here, org transpose element, org table copy, and so on and so forth. And these are links, so you can click on it or hit the return key, and it is telling you org meta return, what it is, how to use it, etc. Other things related to it, so you can follow those as well. And so you can follow the thread and see where it leads you. You will always be learning something in the process. Notice that when you are, when the point is over a symbol, I don't have one over here, but let's type something quickly. Find file. When the point is over a symbol that is relevant to the Control HF, Control HV, or Control HO commands, let's do it, Control HF. Notice that in the mini buffer, it is enclosing find file, so the symbol at point, it is enclosing it in square brackets. This means that it is the default. So if I hit the return key, it will be information about find file. So this can help you speed things up if you have something at point and you want to get help about it. Let's close this and let's delete this. We don't need it. So that's about it with the basic help functions. One thing to know is that if you are checking functions at variables, let's do this again. Let's do modus. You will notice that there are some specific symbols that have two hyphens in their name. So like you see over here, you see all those that are colored with magenta have two hyphens in them. This means that the symbol is meant for a private use. It is meant to be used by the package for its own purposes internally. And this means, in other words, that you should not use those functions or variables unless you definitely know what you are doing. And the reason you should not use them is because those can change without prior notice. So things may break if you try to depend on them. Whereas when there is a regular function or a regular variable, good packages or the right thing to do is to have an obsolescence notice. So if you make something and you change things, you have an obsolescence notice, and therefore anything that depends on that function or variable knows that it has to adapt accordingly. But those are the kind of technicalities you don't need to worry about unless you start tinkering with Emacs Lisp code. It is still something to bear in mind though. So let's move on to the next section. I already explained how to use Control H as a prefix key. So you type Control H and then another key, and that gives you the relevant command. However, you can also use Control H as a suffix. And this means you type out a sequence, a key sequence, and if this key sequence is not yet finalized, if it is not yet concluded, you can type Control H to get help about what this key sequence does, or in other words, which keys extend this sequence. So what is available after those keys. So let's use one practical example here with the Control XR. Control XR is a prefix that extends two commands pertaining to registers, bookmarks, and also rectangle operations. So there is a lot to learn here. I have typed Control XR, and let's say now I forgot what is available. So now I follow it up with Control H. Oops, sorry, 1 second. I have something in my configuration that I need to adapt. let's go 1 second to Embark. I will explain what this is very quickly, but let's have this right away. Let's evaluate this. First, I want to show you the default, and then I will explain what that was. So Control X R, and then Control H. This produces a help buffer, and this help buffer has all the key bindings that extend the Control XR prefix and what is bound to each of those. So you can learn more about those over here. I won't bother you. Of course, you can just type in, for example, Control XR to insert a register, and you can follow the link to understand what inserting a register means, and so on, increment a register, and so on, so forth. These are also covered in the manual, by the way, but here we cover the help commands first. And you can see for everything that I have over here. Same principle for every key sequence. For example, in org mode, there are lots of keys that are bound to Control C and then Control X and then something else. Control C, Control X, Control H. And look at all these. So these are all the key bindings that org modes binds to the Control C, Control X prefix. And of course, because of the Control H help command as a suffix, I can learn about all of those. Of course, you don't have to learn about them at once. You can just learn what you want in the given context, in the given workflow that you have, and then gradually learn about others as well. So you don't have to do it all in one go. So that's it. Once you get more experienced with Emacs and once you start configuring your system, chances are that you will stumble across one of the best packages, another one of the best packages in the Emacs milieu, which is Embark by Omar Antolin Camarena. Let's write it here, Embark package by Omar. I think I have it already, Omar Antolin Camarena, and you want to use this package because it is very powerful, it is very good. I won't explain what this is, I have a video in my backlog, but you can also check its documentation. In short, what matters now for the Control H suffix? Embark provides a command, a function rather, that will intercept the Control H suffix, and instead of putting it in a help buffer, it will use mini buffer completion. So let's do this, let's do, I don't know which one to do now. Let's do Control C, Control P, which is not destructive. Let's type Control C and then Control H. So Embark produces a completion buffer, so the regular stuff that I am familiar with. So let's say that I want something to do with headings. So you see, Control C, I have already typed this. So Control B is the extension of this. And if I do this, or backward heading, same level. So if I hit the return key over this, it will perform the command, okay? So you don't get the help buffer, you instead invoke the command using completion. I think once you familiarize yourself with the major modes and everything, Embark, the kind of interface it has here is the better interface. However, and this is a general rule, I recommend that you learn the defaults before making sweeping or far-reaching changes. It is important to understand how things work, and then it is also important to understand what your setup is trying to accomplish, what it is working towards, what it is trying to improve. And by doing so, by taking it one step at a time and being very careful and deliberate with the packages that you use, you will eventually understand how your system is pieced together. And this has, of course, its own value, but let's not elaborate on that right now. Let's move on to the next section instead. How to read manuals. This may be obvious, though judging by the emails I receive, it may not be so. And the thing to say is that technical documentation is not the same as a book that you will read at night. It is not the same as literature. These are not novels. These are reference manuals. So you will read something and you will return to it to reread it whenever you need. So it's not some story that you learn about and then you recall it whenever you want. It doesn't work that way. So of course, Emacs is a powerful piece of software and its potential will only be unlocked once you are familiar with it. And familiarity necessarily involves reading the documentation, and this means reading the manuals. So to do this, you have to take it one step at a time to learn manuals. And Emacs provides a built-in reader for manuals. These are manuals that are written in the info format. So these are mostly books. They are not standard just readme files. These are a fully fledged book with table of contents, with cross references and so on. So anyway, Control HI is the key binding that you use to access the Emacs manuals. Let's go to the main directory over here. When you are in a new mode, remember what we said. Control HM. This is what you will always be doing whenever you enter a new major mode. Control HM in this case will provide information about the info major mode. So about how to navigate those info manuals, what commands you have on offer. Sorry. Oops, we missed the whole thing. So let's come here. What commands you have on offer and what you can do with them. So it is important to always use Control HM. Now that we are here, let's say, for example, that we want to use, I don't know, let's go to the Elisp. So you see, you can use completion. I won't tell you which key binding I used. I will let you figure it out through Control HM. Actually, I will tell you. It's the M key. And what does the M key do in this context? Control HK and the M key. It is running the command info menu, and it is telling me more about this command. Okay, so this is what we need right now. So anyway, whenever you are reading an info node, so let's say that I am reading something about lists and I am reading something about cons cells. It doesn't matter what this is. I am reading this. I don't want to read this once, move to the next chapter, read the next chapter, and then the third and the fourth, and call it a day. No, I want to read this thing and take it one snippet at a time, understand what this is really telling me, then move on to the next, understand what it is telling me, and so on and so forth. And if I have to revisit it, then I will revisit it for sure. Maybe this is not a very good example for newcomers because this is more advanced material, what I am showing here, but the principle is the same. So let's check something more newcomer friendly. Let's visit the Emacs manual directly. Because the Emacs manual is something you will be referencing often, it is bound to its own key binding. So Control HR to access the official Emacs manual, to read the freaking manual, the fabulous manual. And let's say now, let's go to, for example, Dear Ed or Dired. Let's go over here, and this is telling you all about the directory editor of Emacs, the file manager of Emacs. And let's start with this. How do you enter Dear Ed? And it is telling you over here. So study this one thing. And once you master this one thing, then you can move on to other things that it is telling you over here. And then when you are familiar with those, you can move on to the next section and then the section afterwards and so on and so forth. One step at a time, and that will contribute to propitious growth, to benevolent growth. You will learn more things as you go. So let's move on to the next section. Of course, as I said, it is technical documentation, so you will be revisiting. Don't be afraid to revisit something to refresh your memory. It's not a problem. Then, the next section over here, to tinker with Emacs Lisp, also known as eLisp. When you are familiar with all that I have already covered, when you know how to use Control-H-K, Control-H-M, search for functions, variables, etc., it is time to start tinkering with Emacs Lisp. You may want to do this because you may eventually want to customize some aspect of Emacs. And to customize Emacs, sooner or later involves writing your own code. You may not have to do that. You can use Emacs without much customization, but if you want to really be specific about details or to really have your own custom code, you have to use eLisp eventually. So some background here in case you don't know. I learned eLisp without being a programmer. I switched to Emacs 2.5 years ago. I had no knowledge of Lisp, nothing whatsoever. So I started and I was tinkering, I started from scratch, and eventually I learned all those commands for help. And then I started slowly but steadily writing my own Emacs Lisp. So here I will draw from my experience. This is an example based on what I was doing in my early days. So let's say that we want to write a function that we will bind to a key. So every function that is bound to keys, that can be bound rather to keys, is called a command. And commands are always interactive functions. So command is just a different word we use for interactive functions. So the command that we want to define now will take the point, the cursor, and move it 15 lines down, and then 15 lines up, 15 down, 15 next line, and 15 previous line. So how do we get started? We use Control-H-K to first learn about Control-N and Control-P. Control-H-K, Control-N. And this tells me that Control-N runs the command next line, and this command is bound in the global map. So it works in every major mode unless it is explicitly overridden by another major mode. And then further below, it is providing the arguments for next line, and then it furnishes the documentation. So what we need to know now is move cursor vertically down arg lines. So if you provide an argument, a numeric argument, for example, if you type Control-5 and Control-N, Control-5 and Control-N, which is the same as Control-U 5 and Control-N, it will move 5 lines down. Control-5 and Control-P, 5 lines up. And this is what we need to know now. So let's do also Control-H-K for Control-P, and this one runs previous line, otherwise it is the same principle. So this is what we need to get started. We know the commands we want to use, and we know that they accept a numeric argument. So what we want to do is to write a very thin wrapper function, which will simply, when we invoke it, it will simply call next line and give it the number 15 as an argument, or previous line and the number 15 as an argument. You will eventually, let's go to this help buffer over here. You will eventually, through checking out all those links over here, figure out that functions are declared with this keyword over here. Technically, this is a Lisp macro, but don't worry about it. Defun, then the symbol of the function, its name that is, then the list of arguments, if any, then a docstring, and then the code. I will show you now how we can make use of this specific pattern, of this specific syntax. Let's also have the scratch buffer here. So I have written those already. I was just having them here for the purposes of this demo. So let's see how it is. Define. So we use this keyword over here, this Lisp macro, and then we give it the name of our command. Here I am calling this my next 15 lines. Of course, this is just for didactic purposes. You want to give it some other name. And the list of arguments over here is an empty list. Arguments mean parameters that are read by the function and govern the behavior of the function. In this case, we don't have any arguments, so the function will have a uniform behavior. In principle, depending on the code, it may still be evaluating variables, but at least dynamically, it is not having any parameterized behavior. So what we are doing here is we want to make this function interactive. So this is what makes a function a command, as I explained already. And then all we want to do is to run next line and give it the numeric argument 15. So let's evaluate this. You evaluate a function in Emacs Lisp by going to the end of the function and typing Ctrl+X, Ctrl+E. Or if you are in Elisp buffers, such as the scratch buffer, you can do Ctrl+Meta and X when you are inside the form. And now that it has evaluated this, let's do MX and then my next 15 lines. So I can see that it moved downward 15 lines. Let's come back over here. So it went from the number 4 to the number 19. This sounds correct. So let's also do this thing over here with the previous lines, but let's first go 15 to the next lines and now previous lines. So you see I am back here. So it works. That's very promising. Let's now read again about the documentation of previous line or next line, because it will tell us at the end, this function is for interactive use only. In Lisp code, use forward line with negative argument instead. So I will show you what this means in practice, because I have it over here. We want to follow best practices when we are informed about them, because when some command is declared as interactive only, it means that in principle or theoretically, it may change its behavior at some point. So you shouldn't rely on it in your own custom code. Instead, you should use forward line, which has a more predictable behavior and which should not really change. So we are adapting our code and we use forward line and forward line minus 15, forward line and 15. And it will do the exact same thing, but this one is the correct way to do it because of what we read in that docstring. So this is the very basic way you can define your own functions and make them interactive. So this is what you need to get started. Now what you want when you have some commands is to actually bind them to some key binding. Okay, so how do I, for example, bind this command to Control-Shift and N? Let's say that this is where I want to bind it to. First, I need to know how to represent Control-Shift and N. So I can use Control-HK for this. Control-HK, and now I hold Control and Shift together and press N. So it is producing a help buffer here. What I am interested in right now is this thing over here, the very first thing. Control, capital C, capital S, and N. Also highlighted further below over here. So this is the key binding for Control, Shift, and N. So I know how to write this now. And of course, Control, Shift, and P is written with just a P at the end. The manual explains how to write your own key bindings, how to define them. This is the syntax I have settled in. In my .emacs, I have some variants of this, but this is the basic principle. So it's the define key function, then you specify the map, then the key binding. What is the key binding? If you do KBD and then what you see in the help buffer, this will always give you a very reliable code. You can see below it is giving some code. It doesn't really matter, but it is always reliable. I have never had a problem with it. And finally, you give it the symbol of the command. So you do it like this. And for my previous 15 lines as well, same principle. So I already have this bound to my own variants. You see, these were among the first commands that I defined, and I still have them, though of course I refined the code a bit. Be careful with the map that you are specifying it for. This is for the global map, so it works for every major mode unless that major mode explicitly overrides your keys. If you want it for org mode specifically, you want to use the org mode map. How do you learn about the org mode map? You will learn it through trial and error, or through Control HM, through Control HK. There are many ways. For example, Control HK, and as I said, Control C, Control T, it is telling me, for example, that this command is bound to the org mode map. Okay, so if I want specifically to bind this command to org mode map, I replace global map with org mode map and I am good to go. And this is why I am using this specific syntax, because it works everywhere. So let's move on to the next section, which is about experimenting with Emacs Lisp conditionality. And we want to check the scratch buffer again. So what I have over here is a variable that I am defining over here. And this is just very simple for you to see. It is def var, define a variable, the symbol of the variable, the value of the variable, and then a documentation string. The documentation string is important, maybe not for your own code, but also for your own code because you can read it. But it is important when you are producing help buffers, because this is where the help buffer gets its documentation from the docstring. So we have this variable over here, and let's experiment with our first conditional statement. If this variable is true, then run this function. If it is not true, run this other function instead. You can evaluate this with Control X, Control E, or in the scratch buffer, you can type Control J for the preceding function, the preceding form, the preceding balance expression, and it will return the value of that expression. So Control J, and it is telling me that it is true. So this is what it returned. If this is nil, let's evaluate this. Control J, it is not true. Okay, so we have our very first if statement. Of course, you don't want to use a variable for this specific case with the 15-line motion. It doesn't make much sense in this case to bind that to a variable. What makes more sense in this specific context is to have an optional argument for your command. Arguments, as I said, are parameters that change the behavior of the given function. In this case, this one is optional, so you can run the command without it. What this argument does, what this arg represents in this context, because notice the interactive spec that is a bit different from what I shared earlier, this represents the Control U prefix argument, so the universal argument. You type Control U and then the key binding. When you do that, arg will be true. So if arg is true, so if I have invoked this command with the Control U prefix, then call this function. Otherwise, so if I don't invoke it with Control U, call this other function. So this is the very basic way to use parameters, to use conditionality, and so on. It is important to stress that this is optional in this case, because of course, if it is like this, then it means that you must always supply the argument, and it wouldn't make sense here because then the if statement will always be true. Okay, so you don't want to have if true then whatever, because then you don't need this. You could just call this directly. There are lots of other keywords for checking conditions like cond, pcase, when, unless, and there are variants. But let's not worry about those. You will learn more about those as you familiarize yourself with Emacs Lisp code. This is just to give you a very general idea, and eventually through trial and error and by studying source code or by studying what others are sharing, you will improve. Of course, if you are a programmer, you will understand those concepts quite fast. I am not a programmer, so it took me some time, but eventually I got there. So yes, we have covered this already. So finally, in conclusion, folks, practice and be patient. It is of paramount importance to learn how to use the help system. These are the fundamentals, but they are not fundamentals in the sense that they are meant for beginners. They are fundamentals in the sense that they are a key aspect, an irreducible factor of your capacity to use Emacs effectively. So regardless of your skill level, you will always need those. And this is true in general for Emacs's introspectable nature, but let's not go into the technicalities. What this basically means is that, for example, if you change a key binding and then you type to Control-HK to tell you about the key binding, it will show you information about the updated command that you have changed. Okay, so it won't use the old value. So this is what we mean by self-documenting. It understands changes dynamically and it shows you the up-to-date state of affairs. So this is the one thing. The other thing is your disposition. You need to be patient. You need to take things slowly. There is no shortcut to expertise. There is no some hidden trick, some hack that you can use to learn Emacs over the weekend. It won't work that way. So you have to take it slowly. Everyone who is an expert started out as a rookie, and this is true for every area of expertise, for anything that involves a degree of sophistication. No one started out as an expert. So don't worry if you are making mistakes. Don't worry if you are a newbie. There is nothing wrong with that. Don't worry if you are finding yourself in a process of trial and error. That is okay because it is part of learning. So no need to apologize about it. It is all part of the process. Tinker with Emacs Lisp by trying to understand small patterns. Don't try to be overly ambitious, like you will write great things as soon as you get started. Try to understand those small patterns, how they work, how you evaluate variable, how you check for a specific condition, and so on and so forth. And then eventually you will be able to combine those into greater designs and eventually enact the kind of change you want to see in your Emacs setup. The key again is to take it slowly. Finally, not finally actually, there is one more after that, but complement the official resources, so the help system and the manuals and everything, with the rich corpus of knowledge that is shared by the Emacs community. And this comes in various formats such as blog posts, videos, and also code that is readily available. And also, of course, the source code of packages. And finally, always read the documentation. There is no other way around it. You will always have to study the manuals. You will always have to read the docs. No one will spoon feed you knowledge. That's the thing that you need to know. So with these in mind, I think you have what you need to get started with learning Emacs. Of course, you can watch videos, you can read blog posts, everything that I just mentioned, and by gaining information from those various sources, you will eventually improve your skills and start using Emacs more effectively. And who knows, maybe you will start writing your own packages like how I am doing, and maybe those packages will also be useful to other people and they will want to install them, and we will all be better off as a result. That's all for now, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. I will include this presentation. I will post it on my website. It will be below the video. I am always publishing the videos. I am embedding them on my website. So the article that will include this video will also include as an annex this presentation over here. If you are watching this on the video hosting platform, there will be a link to my website from where you can find this. And of course, once you are on my website, you can find everything else that I do pertaining to Emacs, and not only. So that's all for now, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.